But every once in a while, I think I kind of get a hankering to design something new. One of the upcoming projects that I've started working on is a 2-watt amplifier. This is going to be something like the Robinette Champ Micro, and it uses a 12AU7, but I've got a bunch of 6SN7s, the octal equivalent of those. And the basis of that is going to be this Hammond transformer that I used for one of the first amps I built, which is a Kalamazoo Model 1. I think this guy is going to give me about 260 volts on the plate, which is about right for that kind of tube. And then the output transformer is this little tiny Fender reverb thing that I picked up for like 12 or 15 bucks. As I kind of went through the parts list, I realized I had every single part for this amplifier just sitting in stuff that I had. So this is a true parts bin build, except for maybe this. I did buy this, but one of the things you might notice is this lovely little cake pan. And this kind of goes back to my roots of building cheap amplifiers. So I want to make a series of cheap parts bin amplifier builds. This cake pan I found at the thrift store for $1.50 or something like that. I thought, if I cut it here and bend it here a little bit, then it might have something kind of like the Mojo Tone GA5 kit. So I went ahead and made those cuts. Cut this out. I bent up the chassis, as you can see, and I went and did a template of where to drill all the holes. So I've got some jacks here. I'm gonna have a tone and a volume knob. The volume knob is going to be the power switch, kind of like a Champ. I've got another one of those laying around. And then I have an indicator light. This is kind of the basis of this amp. So I'll go ahead and show you a model of what it will look like. The thing that I need to do now is try to figure out the layout. But I'll go ahead and show you what this model is going to look like. This would be a pretty quick build, I think. It's going to be probably point-to-point wired. Although I do have a little bit of this GPO3 fiber board that I could use if it came to that. So here's the model I've worked up for this 2-watt junk bin amplifier. You can see here I have my low and high inputs, tone and volume control, and the indicator. And here's where the power supply board went. I had to kind of jog the transformer over a little bit, but it does look like it should clear. And then I got the reverb output transformer, 12AX7 and the 12AU7, which is really going to be the octal equivalent of that, which I believe is the 6SN7. I've got a couple of those laying around. So we got a 8-inch speaker, and I worked up a pine board cabinet. Unhide that, which should look something like this when it's completed. I'll probably put some screws here on the sides to hold it in, and it'll slide in through a groove in one of these boards. So that is the whole concept behind this amplifier. And the next thing to do is to translate all these mounting holes onto the chassis so I can start drilling. Now, some might be asking, where exactly do you get parts for a parts bin amplifier? Why would you have these things laying around all over the place? And one answer is some projects don't work out and you want to go a different direction with them. Another is I try to order some spare parts whenever, whatever is kind of makes sense. If I find a really good deal on something and I close out, I'll buy something to keep around for later. Now, I mentioned earlier this power transformer, and one of the things I did not mention was this actually used to be a stand-up transformer. So I decided to mount it this direction. So I pulled one of these covers off, and now it's going to mount up into the chassis this way. Here's the current state of the chassis. Today what I did was I took the final measurement of how deep it should be based off of the cabinet that I'll be building, and I bent the extra excess up to kind of give everything a little bit more strength. I did that by scoring a line on the back with a utility knife, and then grabbing some pliers and starting to bend certain locations. Then I found a nice flat right angled metal. I think it was actually the covering for a axle for a utility trailer. So it took a hammer and I kind of beat it into a square shape. And that actually worked pretty good. In fact, I might make some chassis in the future just from some sheet metal that I can find at maybe the hardware store. Oh, I also took these little notches out of the sides, as you can see. That's so that this little lip can slide into the chassis or into the cabinet in a groove that I'll cut in it. One of the most difficult parts of this build has been trying to figure out how to do a power supply. This is a pretty small chassis, and it was hard to try to find where this would be. The power transformer is going to be in closer to here because the speaker is going to be back here, and so that leaves a little space about there, 2 by 3 inches for the power supply. I was trying to think of what I should do as far as point to point. Should I use the spare turret board that I had? And eventually I came up with something that would work pretty good. I'm using these radial electrolytic capacitors because I found these for something like 20 cents each, so I bought about 10 of them. So this is 20 microfarad, 350 volt, really good for low voltage, kind of smaller amplifier builds. The difficult thing is, how do you mount this? I've had some luck mounting these on terminal strips in the past, but for this amplifier, it just wasn't going to work out. And then the other problem is this resistor, which is very huge. I think it's about 1.5 inches long. And so when you have a space of about 3 inches to work, that's kind of difficult. So anyway, this is the layout that I came up with that would be able to do that. So it barely fits right in the space that it needs to and has just enough room for the power transformer. As far as the power supply goes, I used Duncan's power supply designer, but it should give me about 240, 250 volts. Now, as far as the jacks that I'm going to use, so these are the kind I like to use for amplifiers, mostly because they provide some isolation. You're not grounding to the chassis. You can have the ground somewhere else. This is actually a stereo jack, you can see, because we have 3 components. But if you'll look at your mono jacks, you'll notice that they're just the same thing, except this middle element is not installed in the mono jacks. These are the knobs that I'm going to use, so they're going to work really good. Here's what she's going to look like. Here's the indicator light to indicate that the power is on. This was cheap, so I bought it, and I decided to go another way with that build, and so it's getting used up in this build. Here is an 8-lug terminal strip. If I were to mount it like this, then things will work out really nice, as long as I don't try to use these as grounds. I have here my layout. Again, just had one of these on hand. Happened to be able to need it for this build. And here I have some capacitors that I've used for other builds, and for whatever reason, pulled them off and didn't use them. But they'll get used as the tone control in this build. I have an extra fuse holder with a 3AG sized fuse. Happen to have a 1 amp fuse of the appropriate rating. That will also be used in this project with the correct mounting hardware. A clamp here so that As the power cord comes in, it provides some strain relief. Now this is likely pulled from something like an old organ. You can see that this needs a little cleanup. And here I have a jack, which came from some sort of guitar. I don't know, I've replaced a couple of jacks with switchcraft jacks, and this is one of the cheap ones. And this will be used for the output jack. And then here's the mounting components for the power board that I'm building. I didn't have enough standoffs, so I did find these hex standoffs that were pretty beat up from a previous build. They were a little bit too long, so I cut 2 of them in half to get me the right size. And last of all, they have the other half of that dual potentiometer that I pulled apart. This is providing the tone control. This does have an open back because the shaft used to go through here to operate both of these. And I happen to have this piece right here that went on the back of that, and I am going to solder it on there so that it seals that potentiometer a little bit. I printed out a template, a rough template from my 3D model. Figured out that I need about 5 or 6 of those, so I have an 8-strip terminal that I'm going to use for that. 3-strip terminal here and a 3-strip terminal here. I finished modeling up the power supply board, and I've actually got it kind of mocked up. These aren't soldered in place yet, but this is just about ready to solder. Now that I've got this preliminary wiring diagram, I went through and added in those components. My terminal strip, the 3-lug, power supply, and power transformer. And then I tried to arrange the tube sockets in a way that all of the used parts that have shorter leads than you would normally see on a new part, to make sure that they would fit in here. I went ahead and printed out a drill template for the chassis. All I have to do is cut this out, tape it to the chassis, and start drilling holes. I went ahead and did the drilling and put all the mounting bolts in there, finger tight, and see how it's looking. So it looks like everything's going to work really good. I still need to add the output transformer. My output jack needs to go over here in the corner also. Got the front mocked up, and it's looking pretty good. I'm going to try to find a way to at least add some labels that aren't kind of wonky. I might try to do some toner transfer from a laser printer and see if that will transfer to this chassis well. I'm really pleased with how this wiring worked out. I was afraid that these would just be a little too short. I'm planning on running my heater wires right to these terminal strips, and that's right in the perfect place. And my AC, my secondaries will go right there, and that's just about perfect. Everything's just where it needs to be. I don't have to extend those wires at all, which is great. Okay, I had to strip the chassis down one more time to do the finishing work on it. I now have all the mounting holes drilled, and I made an attempt to put some labeling on it. Some of them worked okay and some of them didn't work great, but I think it kind of goes with the theme of this amplifier being, kind of a junk bin build. Okay, I've got most of my components mounted except for pretty much the power board. I also need to work on my grounding. I'm going to do a star ground, so I need to plan where everything's going to go. Being that this is a cake pan that has a coated chassis, it's got a non-stick chassis actually. Okay, I went through a wiring diagram, and I've now completed my mains AC up to the switch, through the fuse, and back to the transformer. I've got the heater wiring set up, so I'm going to hopefully tonight hook this up to my light bulb limiter, see if I've made any mistakes, and see if I can get those filaments to glow. So here's what it looks like so far. And I think it's looking pretty good. Plug the amp into my light bulb limiter, and it's not really doing much right now, being that it only has the filaments and the indicator lamp connected. But if I go ahead and unplug my lamp here you can certainly see the filaments are glowing. So far, so good. Okay, it's been another night of soldering, and I think I've got everything. I've got my high voltage secondary hooked up. I've got the transformer hooked up, my power supply to my preamp tube, and all of the resistors, capacitors, everything to make all that work. And I think the only thing I have to do now is to wire in this Princeton style volume control. I think I originally wanted the volume to be here and the tone to be here, but I thought maybe I'd introduce too much noise if I had the volume closer to the AC circuitry over here. So I moved that. Now I got to reconfigure that, and maybe it's just as easy as following the Fender Princeton layout now. I don't know, but that's the next step, and then I'll be able to test it. Okay, I've got it all wired up now, and I've got it mounted to these two pieces of wood so I can have it a level surface to offset it, so I can plug a jack into the speaker jack up here. And it's pretty good, except it does have a lot of hum. I kind of think that I did the easy thing here and took my hum balance resistors and connected them to the cathode on the power tube. But I don't know if I have enough voltage to lift that. So the best thing I've found to do is to just run that straight to ground. So I'm going to try that and see if that gets rid of the hum. The other thing is that this wire here can either cut in or out the signal. Probably is when I heated up the shield on the solder, it probably melted into the signal line on the shielded cable here. Because it is this connection right here and not down here that's a problem. So I'm going to redo that, and hopefully with those two changes, this will be good to go. Okay, I've got the amp on the bench here with a external speaker, and I'm going to turn it on so you can hear what it sounds like. It's got a really bad hum, and I've tried to use best practices as much as I can to try to keep hum from getting the amp. I'm using a star grounding. I've got shielded wire in there for like the long runs and the most susceptible places. I've got a hum balancing resistors. I tied those to ground. I tied those to the cathode, and just nothing's working. I'm wondering if I even got a piece of aluminum and grounded that and moved it in between the power tube and the transformer. So far, nothing has really gotten this to go away. So I'm just going to turn it on so you can see what it sounds like here. So that's pretty loud. It's like 2 watts of hum, I think. Kind of second guessing myself when I'm looking online, and there was one gentleman that mentioned on a YouTube video about how you can use some local feedback to maybe eliminate that hum if you inject the hum balance resistor mixer point onto the cathode of the power tube, and then feed that back into the previous stage. So the cost of that is simply a few solder joints and a 10K resistor. So I'm going to give that a shot and see if it does anything. Okay, I've made them a modification. Let's see if this works. Well, that's interesting. Let's turn it up a little bit. Looks like I've created a tremolo. Okay, that didn't work. I'm kind of my last resort on this one, so maybe this is a failed project. We'll have to see. So here we are in a mess of my bench. I've really been trying to figure out the source of this hum on this amplifier I built. One of the things I resorted to was picking up some 100 ohm pots to try to see if I could balance the filaments a little bit better because my 1% resistors didn't work, or at least did not solve the hum issue. And that didn't work either. So I've kind of checked everything that I know, and the next thing I'm going to do is to take out the tone control. Could be that, I've got some AC right there. It could be coupling in. And so I'm going to take out the tone control and see if that improves things. If it doesn't, then I think I'm going to call this amplifier a fail, or at least set it aside a little while. Maybe rebuild it in a slightly bigger chassis, because I think the proximity of all of these, of all of the wiring in here, is what's causing a lot of the issues. So I'll unsolder the tone connections, fire it up, and see if that's any better. Well, I've got that unsoldered, and it didn't make a lick of difference. So the one thing I've noticed that does make a difference is if I mute here the inputs to the volume, which would be the output of the first stage, which means that my hum is likely being induced somewhere in this first stage. And being that I don't really have a lot of real estate to work with there, it's likely just the proximity of the signals. And so I think I'm going to give up on this project for the while. Maybe I'll buy a bigger cake pan and build it in a different chassis. Maybe I could reuse these parts. I'll have to extend some wires, splice some wires in to extend some of these. But for now, this project is going to go in a box and wait to be fixed later, because I have more exciting projects to work on. So that's it. Thanks for watching, and if you have an idea of what may be causing this hum, that could be a quick 5-10 minute debug session, let me know, and I might give it a try. All right, thank you.